Do you remember that game Telephone? It's the one where it starts off with a message and then by the time it gets to the 10th person, it's a completely different message. So, I love my mom suddenly turns into I love pastrami sandwiches by person number 10. And the game is so fun and so hilarious because the messages get so messed up. What's not so funny is that miscommunication and misunderstanding happens all the time in real life. And it's one of the #1 sources of arguments and distress in relationships. So it happens between coworkers and their bosses, it happens between husbands and wives, it happens between children and parents, it happens between everyone. And miscommunication isn't so funny when it causes big arguments. Welcome to Film Forward. If you haven't already, ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. I'm Cynthia King and I'm a clinical psychologist. Along with my co-founder, Ariana Vadi, we will be putting out new videos each week, all dedicated to helping you have better relationships with your children, your family members, your co-workers, your partners, all the important relationships. Hopefully you'll learn something new today that you can start applying in your important relationships. We want to get it right, but so often we don't have the tools to communicate effectively. We don't have a course on effective communication as children, as teenagers, as adults. In today's video, I'm going to outline ways to have more effective communication. We also have a whole workshop on how to communicate better, and I'll put that link in the video description. Let's get started. Effective communication tip #1 is listening. And you might be thinking, that's ridiculous, I listen all the time, like listening is easy. And I am here to tell you that most people do not listen well. And listening is the most underrated component of communication. Yet it's probably the most important. Listening is hard because it requires us to put our agenda on hold and truly be curious about what the other person is saying to us. So listening could be an entire video in and of itself, and we probably will do that at some point, but for today, I'm just gonna give you some quick tips. So as therapists, we are trained in something called active listening. And to be clear, I'm not saying everyone needs to listen like a therapist, or that would even be appropriate in your relationships. I am saying that we can borrow some tricks of the trade to listen better in our relationships. So let's think of active listening in 3 domains. Nonverbal, so not using words. Verbal, which uses words. And then in frame of mind, so this is kind of your general attitude. And we'll go through each one. Nonverbal ways of active listening are physically leaning in closer when someone is talking with you. Your facial expressions and tone should match what's being said. So if your friend is telling you something that's a major bummer and you're smiling, you're not really active listening. Gestures are really important in active listening, right? So it might be hand movements. It also might be the way that you're like nodding along or tilting your head, right? All of these things say, I'm here, I'm with you, right? I hear what you're saying. Another thing that's really important is having an open posture. That helps us listen well and it helps people keep talking. No one's gonna keep talking to someone that's sitting here like this, right? Or at least they're not gonna be as open as they would be if you had an open posture. Eye contact is also really important. And I do think it's important to point out that this is different in different cultures, and I can really only speak to American culture, but eye contact is big in American culture, and it says, hey, I'm with you, I'm listening, I'm here, right? I'm paying attention. Verbal ways of active listening include summarizing what's being said. So let's say that your friend just told you a bunch of information, and you might just take a moment to kind of like recap in a sentence what you just heard them say. And this gives them an opportunity to correct you if what you heard is not actually what they were trying to tell you, or it gives them an opportunity to add stuff because they're like, oh yeah, and then, right? And then you can deepen your understanding of what it is they're trying to tell you. Utterances that say you're following along are also really important. I know that word utterances is weird and doesn't sound good, but it actually is good. So an utterance is something like, oh my God, wow, right? So it's little verbal cues that you're still hanging with them. And last is asking questions to clarify or deepen your understanding of what they're saying, right? And that's the goal with questions when you're listening, is to get more information. It's not to challenge or to change the subject. It's to get more information. So you might say something like, oh gosh, that sounds awful. Tell me more about that. Or what do you mean when you said, right? So those are all aimed at, let me understand you better. And last is frame of mind. In order to listen well, we have to truly be invested in hearing what the other person is saying. We have to have an open and curious attitude about their experience. And you can see this gets sticky when emotions are high, right? Because I've done it. I know you've probably done it. My partner will be talking to me about something or giving me feedback that's hard for me to hear. And instead of listening to what they're saying and trying to deepen my understanding, I'm formulating my defense and what I'm going to say next. That is not active listening. So the pull to do that, like, I get it, and it's not effective. And it's really important that we think about how to be effective in our relationships. That's a really important frame. Do you want to be effective or do you want to be right? Because listening is so hard, it's important to be aware of the telltale signs that you're not listening well. Number one is what we just talked about, and that's formulating what you're going to say while they're still talking. Number two is the person starts to appear emotionally shut down and may even start to share less. Number three is if your environment really isn't conducive to listening well. So your phone's going off, maybe you're picking up your phone, the TV's on, there's music playing, it's just too distracting of an environment, which is really easy to happen in this day and age. So it's important that if you're invested in listening well and making the other person feel like they really matter, make sure that you control your environmental factors that are getting in the way. Effective communication tip number two is be clear, concise, and direct. It's so important to be clear about what we are asking for or about what we are needing from another person. So remember, part of clarity is brevity. Have you ever been in a situation where you're having a conversation and the person is going on and on and on and on, and you've kind of lost track of the whole point? Brevity and clarity are the remedies to that. The tricky part here is that a lot of people go into a conversation and they don't really know what the point is that they're trying to communicate. So take some time and maybe gather your thoughts and say, okay, what am I wanting to get out of this conversation with my partner? Or what am I wanting to communicate to my kid so that X, Y, and Z changes, right? So think about what is your goal before you enter the conversation. That sets you up for success. Since the majority of communication is nonverbal, this is really important. It's also part of listening, but I'm talking about this as separate outside of listening, just in general when you're having a conversation with somebody. So eye contact here in America says, okay, I have confidence, like I believe in what I'm saying, and I'm following along, and what you're saying is important. And open posture says, hey, I'm here to collaborate, and I'm receptive to the communication that we're having. So it's really important for you to check in with yourself to make sure that your body language matches your words, because it's really confusing when they don't. You're actually sending mixed messages. It is not clear and effective communication. There's a joke in my family that when we ask my mother how she's doing with something or if she likes her food, she'll say, it's fine. So she's not really fine, and it's not actually fine, but the word fine would imply that it's okay, right? But her sassy tone and the way her eyes look would tell us that it's like anything but fine, right? So it's really important that we tune in and say, okay, am I matching up here? And if I'm not, what is that about? What am I afraid to say? How can I remedy that? Tone of voice is really important when we're trying to have an effective conversation. The words we say are important, but how we say those words are just as important. So if I'm talking to my partner and I say, I hear you, that's really different than I hear you. I'm communicating a whole lot of anger and resentment in that second one. So when trying to have an effective communication, it's really important to try to keep your tone even. And I'm not saying that you can't get emotional or have big feelings about a topic. I'm just saying that once you get to about a 6 out of 10 on the emotion continuum, you're no longer being effective because you're no longer going to be able to think or communicate clearly, and the person on the receiving end is no longer going to be able to openly receive what you're saying to them, right? And so if you find that your emotions are getting big and your tone is getting loud or sassy, that's when you need to take a step back, take a time out, go calm yourself down, and then agree on when you can actually come back to the conversation and have it in a productive way. And we have a whole article on barriers to effective communication, and this is one of the common barriers, high emotions. So I'll put the link to that article in the video description below. Use I statements. I statements require us to own our feelings and take responsibility for them. So we're not putting our feelings on anyone else. We're saying, this is mine. These messages are non-blaming, so they are less likely to cause defensiveness in our partners, so they're more likely to keep the conversation going rather than shutting it down. The general format for an I statement is, I feel blank when you blank. I feel frustrated when you're late for dinner. I feel disappointed when you don't call me before I go to bed. So instead of, you really pissed me off when you burst into my room, I feel frustrated when you come into my room without knocking. So you statements bring up defensiveness and they stop the conversation, whereas I statements are non-blaming, non-judgmental, stick to the facts, and facilitate conversation. And they're also really hard to do, especially when we're feeling upset. So it takes a lot of practice. So here's a more advanced format if you're feeling fresh and you're ready to try it. And that goes something like, I feel blank when blank because blank I need blank. Okay, so I feel frustrated when you burst into my room because I really value privacy. I need you to knock before entering. Effective communication skill number 6 is ask open-ended questions. And again, this might sound super basic, but this technique keeps people talking. This is why you can go into a therapy session and actually talk for 60 minutes and go, oh my gosh, I never talk that much. It's because we're asking open-ended questions. Open-ended questions invite conversation and require the speaker to elaborate, right? And they cannot be easily answered with a yes or a no. So these are great questions to use, especially if you have a teenager, because they're notorious for just giving the shortest answer possible and then going on and living their lives. So instead of asking, did you have a good day? You might ask, what was your day like? Or what happened today? Neither one of those questions can be answered with a yes or a no. Of course, you can always still get a short answer from an open-ended question, but you are more likely, like there's a higher proportion, that you're gonna actually get more information. And last, ask for clarity. A huge part of ineffective communication is that we didn't actually hear what we thought we heard in the first place. So stopping and saying, hold on, let me make sure I heard you right. And spit back out what you think that they just said. Or, okay, hold on, so do I have this right? And ask a question. Or maybe you say, hold on a second, I'm not sure I got that. And you just ask a clarifying question about whatever it is they said. Practice makes permanent. So the more you engage with other people and have these types of conversations and practice these skills, the better you're gonna get at it. I also encourage you to drop the assumption that you're doing these things well, because there might be areas that you're struggling and could use improvement. And that's okay, but let's know what those areas are and be intentional about practicing. I really hope you learned something today, and Spin Forward is all about helping people with their relationships, and we publish videos every week. So go ahead and ring that notification bell and get subscribed if you haven't already. Thanks, hope you have a great day.